Hi, Jeanette.
Hi, how are you?
Haven't seen you forever. It'll be like 24 hours.
3 days in a row.
Ms. Grayson, I think we have quorum. If you would like to go ahead and start, I would request that everyone sign in, name and organization into the chat, because that really helps us with being able to do the attendance part of the minutes.
Okay, hello, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to call this meeting to order at 1:03 p.m. And we will start with public comments. But before we do that, I would like to tell the task force members that we will be joined today by Council Member Adam McGew, who is with District 10 and serves as the City Council's Transportation Committee Chair. And he's very interested in hearing our presentation. He'll either be with us, he may be with us right now, but if not, he will join us later in the meeting for the transportation section. So do we have staff, Susan, do we have any public comments today? Susan?
Yeah, I'm here. We do not have any public comments. We do have some other guests this afternoon. Gus Concarly, who is the interim director for our transportation department, is here. Kamal Falani, Kay Shelton, and Todd Plesko are also sitting in with us today from DART. I don't know if Kay, if Catherine Rush is also here yet or not, from our transportation department. But they're here also, just in case we have questions, so that they can help support this discussion related to transportation.
Okay, I have seen Sam Merton check in. He is the liaison to the District 10 Council office. So Sam, will you be sitting in today for Adam McGew? I don't know if he can hear me.
Chair. Hello, Madam Chair.
Sam, hi. Hi.
Hey, I guess you couldn't hear me before.
No.
He may jump in at some point, but I will be here for the duration on his behalf.
Great. Okay, good. Thank you.
Sandy.
I saw your name. What?
Oh, I'm
I said
sorry.
thanks for having me.
Well, you're very, very welcome to join us. Glad you're here.
Sandy or Sue, do we have anybody here from DISD? It's Rita.
That I don't know.
I do not believe we do. We had invited, it was fairly last minute, so I don't know that they were able to join us. We can certainly follow up with them.
And maybe it may be that they're not here yet, because we're going to do a few other items before we get into the transportation presentation. So with that, and we don't have any public comments, let's move to the approval of minutes from our December 7th meeting. I hope you've all had a chance to look those over. Does anyone have any corrections or additions to the minutes?
I do, Sandy. This is Jeanette Menier.
Jeanette, yes. What is your change?
The change says that Jeanette Menier has grants available through the Texas Trees Foundation. I want to make it Texas Tree. To clarify that is Texas Trees do not have grants available to the public through the foundation, but has the ability and is securing granting funds for projects, research, and programming. So I just want to make that clear so people didn't think that we were granting funds. We are able to get grants for projects for us.
Well, with that correction, could we go ahead and change the minutes to reflect what Jeanette just said for that clarification? And then we can approve the minutes next month with that change?
Yes,
Are
we
there
can
any-
do that.
Are there any others? Any other task force members? I thought I heard someone. Okay, with that, we're going to go ahead and hold the minutes. I'm hearing like an echo.
I am too. If people could remember to turn off their mic if they're not speaking, I think it would probably help.
Okay, hopefully that will help. So we'll go ahead and we'll hold the minutes from this month or from last month. We will hold the approval of that until next month until we get that clarification put in there. And so then let's move to our next item, which is the report on the White Rock Lake Old Fish Hatchery issue, which Council Member Paula Blackman asked us to, she wanted this task force to be briefed on that issue as it falls under our purview. So it's section 6 of the CCAP, which is, ecosystems and green spaces. So she felt like it was appropriate for us to be briefed on that issue. And since I was a member of her committee, I'm going to go ahead and do a brief report for you all today. So could we put up those slides?
Okay, are you pulling those up or do you need me to?
I need you to.
Okay. Okay. Okay, are y'all seeing it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I know I am. Can you go to the next slide?
Yep. All right, you should be seeing a project location map.
No.
Are you seeing the cover sheet?
We're seeing the cover sheet.
Okay. There may be a little bit of a lag. Are you seeing the project location map?
No.
What happened?
Go to the next slide and put it in presentation.
It's in presentation.
Maybe enable editing. Maybe. Yeah, now we can see it, but it's not in presentation there.
Let me go back. All right.
Yeah, we can
Now?
see now project location is just really small because it's not in presentation mode.
Oh, wow.
Bottom.
I'm not sure what to do because it's showing up as my whole screen.
So the screen we're seeing looks like you're editing it in your PowerPoint.
Well, now I'm seeing it. I can see it now.
Okay.
Is there anybody who can't see this slide that shows White Rock Lake?
I can see it as just smaller.
Yeah, it's small because it's not
Yeah,
enable editing.
well, whoops, it's went away.
Hey,
Katie,
sorry,
are you rescuing?
I got you.
Cool, thank
That's
you.
good.
There we
Perfect.
go.
Perfect.
Okay, I think we've got it. So let's go ahead and get started. So as I said, Councilmember Paula Blackman, who's Council District 9 and White Rock Lake is in her council district. She asked that our task force be briefed on this issue, which occurred in her district last fall. You may have read about it in the newspaper. It was about Encore clear cutting their land underneath the power lines by White Rock Lake. And the area at which they did that was called the Old Fish Hatchery, and it's outlined in red on this particular slide. So as I said, the issue falls under our section 6 of the CCAP. So she felt as though it was important for our task force to be aware of this. So the old fish hatchery is 50 acres. Again, it's surrounded in red there. It's on the southwest end of White Rock Lake. It's by the dam and the spillway. So the hatchery was constructed in 1930 to hatch fish from White Rock Lake when the lake wasn't being used to provide drinking water. In 1953, when we had that major drought in Dallas, the lake was again used for drinking water, so the fish hatchery was closed. So next slide, please. So on this slide, you can see how heavily wooded the fish hatchery area was today, and you can see the 3 acres that was clear cut by Encore under their power lines. It just made this swath right through that heavily wooded area. So on the right of the slide, you can see the red line, and that's the cleared area. That's the area that Encore clear cut. And those small squares to the right of the red line are the old fish hatchery cells. And it's all now, after all these many years, covered in dense wooded growth. So the red strip was cleared by TXU. If you all remember, Encore used to be TXU 20 years ago. And then 20 years later, it was cleared again by Encore. So Encore owns the land beneath the power lines, and it's within its rights to do everything that they need to in the way of vegetation management in order to meet their mandate to ensure safe and reliable electric service. But when they did this back in September, they didn't notify the city ahead of time that they were going to do this clearing. And the White Rock Lake community was very upset to see it. So the old fish hatchery is a recognized nature and bird watching area. So Councilmember Blackman established an advisory committee, and she gave them a very short time frame of 1 month to review the issue and work with Encore and city staff to come up with a plan to replant the cleared area and get all the parties involved to agree on how to maintain the area, so that in the future, there would never again be the need to go in and clear cut. So next slide, please. So thank you. So this slide shows the committee recommendations for the replanting. And so it was going to be done in 3 phases. And so the site preparation phase would be to remove invasive species along the edges of the cleared land and at the north and south ends of Encore's right-of-way. And that was going to be starting this month, they would be starting to remove the invasive plantings that are there. And then they were going to go into planting, and the planting would be done in the spring of this year, so that that's the correct time to start trying to establish plantings. And if you notice with the markings on this map, it's got an upland area, and then it's got 5 different ecological areas that are numbered there. So each of those areas are going to be treated some similarly and some differently in terms of how it got replanted. That upland area at the north there is going to be Blackland Prairie. And then in cell 1, directly to the south of it, that's when it transitions from Blackland Prairie to emergent wetland. And then the rest of the cells, 2 through 5, are going to be this emergent wetland plantings. And so then the third phase of this replanting operation is going to be the grow-in phase. And they were going to give that 3 years for the grow-in period. And they were going to do field observations every 6 months. But along with those field operations or observations would be, again, volunteers would go in and they would remove the invasive growth so that they can keep ahead of the invasive growth and give the new planted materials the best opportunity to take hold and thrive. And it just keeps eyes on the area at a regular interval, and it prevents the need for any heavy clearing in the future. And that's the goal here is to replant it, but to make sure it's done in a way that never takes over like the old wooded growth took over, so that Encore would be forced to go in there and do dramatic clear cutting, which nobody wants. So next slide, please. So these are some other committee recommendations. And it was that the Parks Department would be the manager of this area henceforth, and they would make sure that the replantings got done and this plan was followed. But they would do that in coordination with the Water Department and Encore, along with Dallas Audubon and other organizations that would help support this replanting and continual observation and maintenance effort. They want to have a memorandum of understanding created between all these above entities by the end of March 2021. MOU just to keep everybody aware of what the responsibilities should be regarding this piece of property. Encore is going to contract and pay for the replantings on their property, the property that was clear cut. And so Parks would be preparing an old fish hatchery area management plan by the end of March, including educational learning stations and signage. And then everyone there is going to see if they can establish an Friends of the Fish Hatchery area group, so that would be eyes on the project, in addition to all of the city departments and other groups like Audubon. They would like to have a community friends group that would also keep track of what's going on there and just have that neighborhood and community investment in that area. So with that, there is, I think, one more page of committee recommendations. If you would give us the next slide, please. So these outside meetings of Parks and Water Department, Encore, and Dallas Audubon should occur every 6 months for 3 years, as I mentioned. They just, want to keep on top of it, and they think regular reviews will help do that. And then Parks and Water should provide an annual briefing to the Dallas Park Board, the council member whose district it's in, and the City of Dallas Environmental and Sustainability Committee, which is also the committee that this task force reports to. So that's the update, and that's what Council Member Blackman wanted you all to be aware of. And as we get into the later portion of our meeting, where we're going to be discussing the formation of the Environmental Commission, we'll be talking about some of the other issues that other council members have brought up that they want us to be aware of. So anyway, with that, that's the update and report on the old fish hatchery issue, which actually was resolved very quickly through this committee and very efficiently, I thought. So they got it done quickly, they handled it, and I think the community is very much in favor of it. The community was very upset, but I think now they feel as though there's a good game plan going forward. So with that, I don't know if there's any questions or any concerns from the task force members. This was just meant to be an update for you all. Okay, hearing none, let's go into our portion of our agenda. That's the review of the CCAP plan section related to transportation and air quality. And as Sue mentioned, we have a number of guests here today related to transportation, and they're going to be acting as resource for us. If there's any questions after the presentation that our staff needs help answering, these folks are here to help us answer those questions. So
Hey,
with
Ms. Grace.
that, yes. Mhm.
Excuse me. Just very quickly, Dr. Bacalandro had her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
Yes.
Maria?
Yes, yes. I wanted to share the experience we've had in Groundwork Dallas with volunteers. It looks really good on paper, but it's really hard to get the volunteers needed. And then we have a 5 habitat space behind our science building at Cedar Valley, and the invasive species, we paid to get them removed, and they're back and very strong again. So I just want to mention that these recommendations look really good on paper, but it's important to identify the organizations that are going to be providing the volunteers in a systematic way, because otherwise it's a big lot of land. In a matter of time, it will become the same forest. I mean, nature will do its way. So I just want, as a recommendation from our committee, is they should identify the organizations that are going to provide the volunteers, and they have to quantify how many volunteers. Is it a week, a month? With very clear tasks. Otherwise, they're going to have the invasive species go under those cables again. So I
Yes.
know, or it probably they do something to keep it, but it's usually not very nature friendly. You know, if they're going to put chemicals to keep that away, I would have concerns with that because it's very close to the water. So my concerns are the provision of volunteers and then the chemicals that are, or the way they're going to manage that land.
No,
It has to be sustainable.
Maria, no chemicals. All of this is going to be hand pruning.
Okay.
Which emphasizes your point about needing consistent volunteer efforts. And I think that's why they want to form this friends group that will focus specifically on the fish hatchery area. There are a lot of other groups that oversee things going on at White Rock Lake. There's just a lot of community involvement in those neighborhoods around the lake. But I think they want to identify this friends group of the old fish hatchery area so that those would be the group they go to try and get volunteers.
Yeah, and that has to be part of the presentation because that's what makes it sustainable in time. The where they're going to get their volunteers, how many, and that they have that flow of volunteers to keep it maintained. That's all I wanted to share.
No, thank you so much for those points. Very good points. Araman, I think you had something.
Yeah, thank you, Sandy. This can be handled offline. I just wanted to ask if Brett Johnson specifically from the Parks Department is involved. I know when I was working at Groundwork, he was kind of our go-to person for ecosystem restoration, and I feel like he, just based on what I know, he's someone that I think should be able to consult on the
He is actually, Araman, he's actually the point person from Parks that is overseeing this.
Perfect. Thank you.
I didn't mention his name just because I wasn't sure how many of you knew him, but clearly you do. But he's the point person from Parks for this.
He's wonderful. That's awesome to hear.
And he'll appreciate that comment. So thank you. Any other comments? Okay. I see Susan had a comment here in the chat section. So I would suggest reaching out to either For the Love of the Lake or the Texas Master Naturalist Organization. So those are great suggestions. Thank you, Susan. And I will pass those along. So let's go into the transportation section, and Farr Andrews and Katie Evans from OEQS are going to give us this presentation. And please, if you would, maybe Susan, it would be good at this point again, if you would please mention who's here as a resource. And I will also say that Sam Merton, who is in the District 10 Council office, is here, and perhaps Adam McGue, the council member in District 10, who's the transportation chair for the city council, may be here, but if he isn't, then Sam is here from the office.
Sure. So I am thankful to my friends at DART, Kamal Fulani, Kay Shelton, and Todd Plesko are joining us from DART in case of DART-related questions. In addition, Gus Concarly and Catherine Rush from our Dallas Department of Transportation are also joining us.
Okay,
and if I
great.
miss someone else, chime up and let us know you're there. But those are the folks that I saw had signed in, and I'm very excited and happy that you're here to help with this.
Great. Yes, and I appreciate you too taking the time to attend this meeting in case we have any questions that we need you to answer. So thank you for being here. So Farr and Katie, would you go ahead with the presentation, please?
Sure. So good afternoon. I'm Farr Andrews, and today we're going to continue our deep dive into the CCAP. We're going to cover the transportation and air quality sectors today. Next slide, Katie, please. So I am going to walk through each sector, why it matters, talk a little bit about some equity concerns for that sector, review what the targets are for that sector, and then briefly mention the objectives and actions again. And then I'll turn it over to Katie, and she'll walk you through the implementation plan for this fiscal year and talk about what we actually plan to accomplish this year. Next slide. So we'll start with the transportation sector. This is goal 3. What we learned from our greenhouse gas inventory is that this sector is responsible for about 34% of the emissions, greenhouse gas emissions here in Dallas. Next slide. So the actual goal for this sector is Dallas communities have access to sustainable, affordable transportation options. And why does this matter? So in the transportation sector, not only are we looking at private vehicles, we're looking at public vehicles, trains, and planes. And that 34% of greenhouse gas emissions that show up in our inventory, 98% of that comes from on-road vehicles. And what that represents, it's really the majority of the Dallas residents that are driving alone to work, adding to congestion, adding to air quality emissions, and increasing our greenhouse gas emissions as well. So Dallas does have the longest light rail system in the nation, but because of unsustainable land development patterns, we still see this high number of residents driving alone. And this transportation sector, that's one of the things that we plan to address. And it, also what was revealed through the CCAP planning process is that a lot of our critical roadway segments are located in the 100-year floodplain, which means that with increased episodes of flooding, that puts our transportation infrastructure in jeopardy. Next slide, Katie, please. So when we added the equity lens to the transportation sector, this is what we learned. So what you see on this map and what it illustrates is that residents in the southern parts of Dallas have longer commute times. And this could translate to reduced access to jobs. So that's another thing that we want to address through our CCAP plan, in addition to reducing greenhouse gases. Katie, can you go to the next slide, please? So this slide illustrates some of the outcomes that we hope to see from the transportation sector in the CCAP plan. These are our targets. So there's a target related to EV charging infrastructure. And what we're hoping to accomplish is 1,500 outlets to support 39,000 vehicles by 2030. There's also a target related to electric fleets. And what this is we want to see all new transit vehicle purchases by 2030 be fully electric for the city, for DISD, and for DART, and then have 100% electrified fleet by 2040. There's also a mode split goal. So what we want to do is kind of move that needle on single occupancy vehicles. We want to move it from 88% to 79% by 2030, and from 88% to 62% by 2050. Next slide, please. So as Sue mentioned earlier, there are a couple of partners on the line that are also working with us to meet CCAP goals. There's a lot of partners actually working on the transportation sector. And the City of Dallas's Transportation Department is currently developing the strategic mobility plan. And we're aligning our CCAP efforts to make sure that we have an environmental lens on this plan, and we align our efforts so that we move these goals forward from the CCAP plan. And we have some partners on the line that could help answer more questions about this particular plan at the end of this introduction. Katie, next slide, please. So on the regional level, the North Texas Council of Government also has its Mobility 2045 plan. And this regional plan really is a guide to how they're going to use our state and federal funding in this region. And we align our CCAP goals and strategies and actions in some of the areas mentioned on this slide as well. Next slide. So deep diving into the transportation sector of the overall CCAP plan. So there are 4 objectives in this goal. And the first one is to shift the transportation system to move people and goods in fuel-efficient vehicles. And there are also 5 corresponding actions listed on this slide. This goal is really about promoting the most climate-friendly vehicle options by incentivizing EV adoption, by looking at shared mobility fleets and opportunities there, to also exploring electrifying buses, light-duty fleets, delivery fleets, just moving to more sustainable modes of transportation. Next slide, please. So the second objective under the transportation goal is reduce trips where people drive alone. And there are 6 corresponding actions listed on this slide. This objective is intended to address those single occupancy vehicle trips that I mentioned earlier by adopting mode split goals, implementing the bicycle master plan, taking a fresher look at micro-mobility, supporting our strategic mobility plan, looking at mobility as a service, and looking for ways to increase bus service to shorten those headways and just improve the customer experience so that we can move more people out of those single occupancy vehicles into public transportation. Next slide, please. So the third objection in the transportation sector is to synergize land use and housing with transportation to increase access to walking, biking, and public transportation. And there are 5 corresponding actions on this slide. This objective tackles the concerns of transit-oriented development by updating the Forward Dallas plan so that it aligns with CCAP and the Strategic Mobility Plan, expanding the transportation-oriented design guidelines, implementing more mobility hubs, and revising our parking ordinance so that it really supports our mode split goals and minimizes parking in CBD areas. Next slide, please. Okay, there it is, switched. Okay, so our objective number 4 is to ensure that walking, biking, public transit, and vehicular transportation infrastructure is reliable and safe. There are 4 corresponding actions to this objective listed on this slide. And this objective really focuses on infrastructure and resiliency and making sure that as we promote active transportation, we have the infrastructure to support that and it's safe and reliable by really thinking about implementing more green infrastructure designs in our complete streets, improving our bus shelters and the amenities related to public transportation, and just taking a look at how vulnerable our existing infrastructure is, and planning how we address that, and converting our traffic lights and street lights to LED, which is already in the works. So now I'm going to turn it over to Katie, and she's going to talk about which of these actions we're actually planning to activate this year, and maybe give us some ideas of how that's going.
Great. Thank you, Far. So like Far said, I'm going to be talking about what's in our work plan for this year, who we're working with and what we're working on. So who we're working with right now, as Far mentioned, it takes a lot of departments and external partners to address the actions in the CCAP under the transportation sector. So you can see, and a number of these departments and partners have joined us today: transportation, fleet, bond, aviation, economic development, urban planning, sustainable development, public works, and of course our friends at COG and DART. We have been working with our departments to start working on our implementation work plan. And so this implementation work plan, I've listed here over the next few slides, the actions and milestones that we've got going on this year. I want to note that today, by close of business, we will have a good picture of what's currently being done, because our departments will be reporting back to us on what they've been working on for the past quarter by the end of today. And so at our next meeting, we'll have a much better picture on our dashboard of what we've been working on and what's been accomplished so far this fiscal year. So under this year's work plan, we've got Action T1, which is working with our partners at DISD and DART and within the city itself to electrify bus and light duty fleet. So we have initiated the process of getting a fleet electrification study here at the city. We also have received some funds from the VW settlement grant to install some electric vehicle charging infrastructure that we just found out yesterday. So that's very exciting. So a lot of these things are already underway. And I did have the pleasure of tuning into a DART committee meeting, I think it was yesterday, where they approved the purchase of a long range battery bus to pilot for more electric bus purchases. So I know we've got a bunch of people from DART on here. That's very exciting. And I'm sure we'll have some questions about that process too. T2, we will be working with private and public interstate transport operators to expand transit services between major supercommuting cities. So this is again reducing short haul air travel, which is not as much of an issue right now with so many people working from home, but we will continue to work to reduce that short haul air travel and shift to rail as we are able. And then Far mentioned the strategic mobility plan. We will continue to support and expand recommended travel demand strategies identified in that plan. So we're continuing to work with our friends in transportation as they finalize their strategic mobility plan, which last I heard should be available to the public fairly soon, and continue to do outreach and education on reducing travel demand, including but not limited to something we are all very familiar with now, working at home and shifting office schedules. So continuing to promote those travel demand management strategies. T11 has to do with our comp plan update. So we are continuing to make sure that the update to the comprehensive land use strategy aligns with CCAP goals, as well as strategic mobility plan and other city policies. So our goal here, of course, is to reduce transportation related greenhouse gas emissions. As the comp plan update moves forward, we anticipate that starting in about April of this year, last I heard. Someone feel free to jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. Last I heard, that'll start in April, and we will continue to work with our partners at Planning and Urban Design to make sure that all of our goals and the strategic mobility plan goals and all of the city plans align as in terms of moving our actions forward. We'll, of course, continue to work with DART and promote regional job growth, density, and CCAP goals and align it with the bus system. I won't read everything on this page. There's a lot of things with this particular action, but we're excited to work on the land use strategy update. Action T14, adopt a revised parking ordinance strategy that supports new mode split goals and land use strategy that minimizes available parking in transit-oriented districts. This is another one that's underway. We've met a couple times with the CPC and ZOAC to talk about the parking ordinances in the city of Dallas. So we've been working closely with Sustainable Development and those advisory committees to look at our parking ordinance and address some of the issues that we've heard about and that we've seen in terms of parking in those transit-oriented districts and in the city as a whole. So we are moving forward quickly and excitedly with T14. And then, of course, Far mentioned too, the T16, convert all traffic lights and street lights to LEDs. This one is underway as well. There was funding in this year's budget as part of the reimagining public safety to convert some streetlights to LEDs. And so we're working with transportation on this initiative as well. And with that, I believe I turn it back over to Far, unless, we're doing questions and answers now. Is that right?
Yeah, I think we should just jump right into questions and answers on the transportation sector before we move into air quality. Well, let's see if we see any hands go up.
Maria's hand was up, Tracy's hand was up. So let's start with Dr. Bocalandro.
Yes. Thank you so much for the presentation. I do want to emphasize the problem we're having in South Dallas. I didn't see it anywhere, but we have at Cedar Valley, very close by, the last station of DART, which is at UNT Dallas. And there's no safe way to walk or bike or scoot from the UNT station to our college because there's no sidewalks. So I would suggest inviting the people of I think you call it the total streets or whole streets or whatever, where the sidewalks. I think it's important. I mean, you have different layers of information as you're explaining. I know it's very micro, but around where there's been this huge investment in a DART station of a train or a bus station, we should look to see if there's a safe way to walk there as a pedestrian. So I would suggest looking at the open. I heard Dawn say that you didn't have an open space plan yet, but the integration of open spaces and the looking at the pedestrian's view and how they can connect to these huge investments that have been done in transit, in transportation, and if there's a bus stop or if it's a train stop, is very, very important, because otherwise we have a population of 9,000 students. A lot of them would like to walk or bike to our college, and there's no option to do it. And since some of them are not on the DART because they're south of our campus, they have to come in. They have to commute every single day in a private vehicle. So I would suggest for the city of Dallas to incorporate open spaces, biking, but also trails that pedestrians. Just look at the pedestrian and how they are connecting to where the DART system or other transportation is going. Thanks.
Thank you, Maria. Next, I think Tracy was up, or did someone else? I'm sorry.
Just real quickly, Ms. Grayson, in response to Dr. Bocalandro's request, I know that our Public Works Department is doing a sidewalk and pedestrian plan. I will make note of this and make sure that they take a look at it as part of that planning effort.
That's great. That's great that you can make it come right to their attention. Good, Sue. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great intel. Dr. Bocalandro. And as it relates to Dallas ISD and Dallas College, I would really love to see a very intentional move to, as we go electric on our buses, to create the mechanics that we'll need, technicians that we'll need, right from our own source of students. And so I'd just love to see that be a full circle opportunity to create those new green jobs for our local students.
That's a great idea, Tracy, to say that if we're going to have this new technology, let's also train folks to work with it.
Yep.
Yes, and
Perfect.
we are doing some of that in Dallas College. Cedar Valley has an automotive, so do the other schools of Dallas College, and we are going towards electric cars. We are doing it in partnerships with the manufacturers, because there's a lot of manufacturers that have their own training. But yes, we're looking into those options of double certifying, you know, with Toyota or with Hyundai or with a different. But thank you for bringing that up, Tracy. I will bring it back to my Dallas College.
Thank you. Armin, followed by Alan.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Dr. Bocalandro and Tracy, for your comments. I wanted to ask really quickly, I know there was a DART meeting a couple days ago where there was a conversation around electrifying the bus fleet, and I'm really excited that the board has decided to purchase one. If you're curious, I was one of the people who wrote in and to speak to the benefits of electric buses. So I would love to just get like a short summary from you all about what was discussed in that meeting for the whole committee to hear.
So if you like, this is Todd Plusko from DART, and I could respond to that if you want me to.
That would be great.
So the board, they had two parts of the presentation. One is our bus fleet replacement plan, because we have in 2025 we begin the cycle for replacing the oldest of our CNG fleet. And then we also are replacing some light duty vehicles, more 5-year life vehicles, starting this year. So what we informed the board is that we don't have sufficient information for them to make a complete decision to transition the fleet to electric. There still are problems with insufficient mileage that can be operated with these long distance charged buses, and we think that's the best strategy, is the long distance, which is the one bus that we announced to the board that we're going to be acquiring. It's not like the 7 we have that are charged up like every 30 miles, and we'll use what we call opportunity charging. But that's a very expensive approach to go, and it would likely require a lot of infrastructure all over the region for that. So the battery life and the amount of miles is changing almost by the day. So we think by 2025 or the point where we put those out to bid, the board will have enough information to make that decision. But in the meantime, we're going to be getting this new long distance charge bus. It'll operate much longer without a charge. And we're also going to purchase 10 electric buses, more light duty buses, to see if that type of bus can use electric. And so those would be used in the DART service area, particularly a number of areas around Parkland Hospital. And so those could actually show up in 2022. So I think the DART board is very, very interested in continuing to have a clean fleet. We have conversations with Encore because the infrastructure required to charge 200 buses overnight is fairly large, but we are engaging Encore now on those conversations. And I think over the next several years, we'll have completed our analysis so the board can then make a smart decision on that.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that update with all of us. I also wanted to ask, I know, Susan, me and you emailed in the summer and you mentioned the city got some electric charging stations to install, and I was wondering if you could just share a little bit about that and maybe share an update because I'm not sure I've heard the
I
latest.
think I probably need to clarify, we're working with a private vendor who is
Okay.
using trailer mounted charging at commercial existing like convenience stores. There is a network of about 100 of them, and I'm happy to provide a map. I don't have it offhand. As far as purchasing for EV charging ourselves, as Katie indicated, we just found out yesterday that we were selected for grant monies to do that. And so what I anticipate is working with our fleet and our building services divisions. Once we get the fleet electrification study, one of the tasks in that study is to look at where it makes the most sense to deploy charging in publicly owned property. And we'll be using those grants to do that.
Wonderful. So just to make sure I understand, the city is contracted with a vendor to make charging stations available at private locations across the city?
We're not contracted. It is, they're doing it on their own as a private enterprise.
Okay.
We're supportive. We have a memorandum of understanding to allow us to put public information statements on the little electronic screen at their charging stations.
Okay, wonderful. And maybe just a final question. Do you know how many? Oh, I think you said there were 100. Is that right?
It's about 100, I think. I'm happy to provide that information.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I thought that was good news, and I didn't have the details right, but thank you for sharing that information with all of us. And I'll just make one last comment because I know we're going to talk about the structure of our commission moving forward. I think transportation is an area where it's so important for us to work well with partners, and there's so much other work happening that affects our environment, climate change, sustainability, and one of the things I'm thinking about is how we continue to build strong partnerships with DART, with our transportation department, planning and zoning, et cetera, as we move forward so that we can work together with them. And with that, I'll hand it over for the next person.
Thank you, Armin. I think our next person is Alan.
Hello.
Hi.
I had a couple of questions. One primarily connected with zoning and development, and I guess this might be a question for Katie with regard to how transportation will be working with sustainable development in order to identify priorities with regard to zoning and density, and cooperation with sustainable development with regard to the CPAC, and how that's going to be implemented. Because the adoption of the rules for them will really be critical in terms of implementation.
Unless Katie wants to try, I can dive in on that.
Susan,
No,
yeah.
take it away, Sue. You got it.
So we have a couple of internal planning groups on these different initiatives, and we have co-populated each of these groups. There are folks from our staff, from transportation, from others that are on the technical advisory committees for the update to the Forward Dallas plan. So that's one planning group. Our colleagues in sustainable development have formed basically another working group around the issues on parking densities and how that works to support or not support planning, good planning, jobs, that sort of thing. And then there's yet another working group on a related effort, but basically in a laboratory where we can put these efforts to work, and that's the Hensley Field Planning Group. And in particular there, we're looking at trying to get to a project or an area where people don't necessarily have to drive, where we have jobs, where we have groceries, doctor's offices, etc. So it's walkable. very much like the Muller Airport project in Austin. And so they're different efforts with different end goals, but our respective groups are all involved with all of them. And there is some cross-pollination of ideas between the different groups as well. The other thing that's kind of interesting, in particular on the parking conversation, is we have an action in the CCAP related to looking at greening factors for development. And they're looking at, we had anticipated that was going to be farther on in the implementation of the CCAP because we thought it was going to be hard. That group is looking at implementing those as ways of offsetting parking or offsetting density, some things like that. So,
is there any look at, my question really is more related to, we've got a lot of major retail hubs, major intersections where there's lots of retail and then backed up to residential. Is there any thought to rezoning? And this is a political, kind of political hand grenade, but with
great, thanks.
The neighborhoods. But the reality is that in order to really increase density and make some of these retail centers walkable, you're going to have to put some density housing surrounding it so people can live and walk and get to retail and increase density in a very limited way, but where they can walk to a restaurant, walk to a grocery store as such. That's going to be very, very difficult to do, but I think it's critical if we're going to really look at increasing density. That's, it's a nasty word in a lot of HOAs around this, private HOAs around the city.
Yeah.
But it's essential. I live near Casalinda, and housing right next to Casalinda Shopping Center makes a lot of sense, but the way the zoning's configured, it's probably a no-go because of neighborhood opposition. So there's going to be, maybe is there any appetite to take the CPAC and use it as a little bit, maybe a velvet hammer with regard to this issue?
Potentially.
Okay.
I would say that a lot of the issues you are raising are really important. And I do anticipate, and there's been some preliminary conversation along those lines with the how-to, within the folks that are working on the update to Forward Dallas, because that's really probably the most appropriate place to dive in on that. We're certainly supportive. The reason the Forward Dallas update is that is a comprehensive land use plan. My understanding is the zoning follows that initial dive into the land use planning. But that's one of those where we're supportive. We're providing our 2 cents worth, but that is probably in that realm. And unfortunately, we didn't anticipate that conversation, and I don't have anybody from that group on this call today. So, if you think it would be helpful, we could certainly bring them back for another one of our meetings.
I think it's really critical in terms of how, if we're looking at a Forward Dallas, we've got to figure out what Dallas can look like in the future to make it more pedestrian. There's one thing putting sidewalks every way, but if you still got to walk 3 miles to get to your shopping center, yet you would love to live next to your shopping center, but there's no possibility of it because of the density surrounding the shopping center and the retail areas and the retail centers, then that's not objectively or subjectively dealing with the issue.
I tend to agree, and I think you raise an important point. I do think, and my understanding is they have not yet formally kicked off that Forward Dallas planning project. I think they're working with our Office of Economic Development on some related issues, because that's the other piece, is that economic development potential that fits into that mix. If you think it would be helpful, I'd be happy to see if we could bring some of those folks in as they kick off their plan, because I think our group could probably provide some really healthy insights for our planners.
Well, the goal is for carbon reduction, and I think one of the biggest ways is if you've got people living and working and walking to their grocery store and walking to restaurants, it's a big reduction of carbon.
I would agree.
The other thing is, the other question I had was with regard to the bus and bus purchases and electrification. Is there any appetite for determining, I know Dallas buys a big portion of their power from renewables. Is there any appetite, because we've got a lot of bus buildings and fleets, to actually create solar installations to help charge and maybe decentralize the grid and help charge these buses? Because one of my concerns is, yeah, we'll all go electric, but we got coal-fired power plants that are shipping the electricity to us, and that's not really objectively a good idea, because there's a big voltage drop in generating that electricity at a really dirty plant. So,
well stated.
Are we going to do anything about it or talk about in terms of the purchasing, or how CPAC can maybe say, look, City of Dallas, we got to buy all our electricity from a renewable source, or we have to begin doing solar arrays in conjunction with doing maybe DART looks at purchasing dedicated locations and allowing them to zone and put solar arrays on their fleet locations for buses if we're going to have to electrify and move towards electrification. The thing is, our goal is to reduce carbon, and if we're not reducing carbon because we're buying dirty electricity, that's not I don't think our goal is being met.
I'm noticing that Todd has his hand up. Todd, do you want to address this one?
Just a little bit. So on our light rail vehicles, I believe we are at this point obtaining all of our, and also on our buses that are electric, I think we're getting that electricity from a renewable source. Now there's still hydrocarbons involved with CNG, but on the electricity, you can generally now buy electricity from a renewable source in the market. So that's been one of DART's objectives. The issue of charging and putting in large solar farms essentially to charge buses, we have not studied that. We don't know, that's probably a good question, and seeing if it could be done. And we have lots of flat land that you could perhaps, put in solar arrays, but then you've got to have batteries to hold it so that you can charge at night when the vehicle. So that's part of more of this issue of looking at, how do we actually make that transition to an electric, a zero pollution type model for the future. So there's a lot more that we don't know. There's a lot of things out there that people are talking about, but I don't believe there's any transit systems that have completely overcome all these problems.
Right, and I agree and I understand. I'm just concerned that we're gonna electrify a bus fleet and then have to, pump up the electricity to supply the charging capacity, and maybe there's going to be an allocation. Maybe at some point in time, we're going to run out of the renewable resources that we can buy, and an electric company can allocate to make massive electrification. So we're going to have to, I think CPAC's going to have to incentivize the development of solar arrays throughout the city. I mean, we have hundreds and hundreds of acres of flat warehouse land, which are perfect locations to locate solar arrays. The Lone Star Business Park, as you drive up 30, you can see acres, 100 acres of rooftop. So I don't know how we incentivize that, but that seems to be really, that's the direction we could head to decentralize the grid. And maybe we'd have to engage in Encore in that project, and that's how maybe we bring Encore is they start electrifying using power generated off the rooftops. That's certainly a cleaner source than a coal-fired plant.
Hey, this is Michael. Let me know when I can chime in, please.
Sure, go ahead.
Sue or Susan. So I think that's probably, as I look at the forward agenda, I love what you're saying, Alan, because that's the world I live in every day. I think that's a February conversation when we were doing buildings and energy, correct, Sandy?
Yes, I
Okay.
was going to say a lot of what Alan was talking about, I think would be great. And you mentioned it too, Michael,
Sure.
about the solar and how we could talk about that, I think in February when we do buildings and energy.
Great. Yeah. And all I want to say, Todd, for you, I don't know you, but what I can tell you is the answer is absolutely. Where you have charging stations, just real quick, you'll be able to put solar. If you've got a roof, put solar on it. The question is, how much of the power will it provide versus how much you've got to pull from the grid and how you work in batteries. Since this is a 20-year plan, the good news is those answers will get better every quarter, every year for sure. So be optimistic about how that's going to offset and address the issue that Alan brought up, because we already have the technology. It's just going to get better. So that's the good news. And then I had a question, and I forgot, Katie, I think it might have been you presenting about the actions and milestones. So T1 under the fleet electrification study, just got a couple questions. When is that study going to start, and when will it be finished? Do we know yet?
I can answer that one too.
Okay.
We're working with the National Renewable Energy Lab on a contract right now. We anticipate contract approval in March. Starting thereafter, we hope to have it completed by the end of this fiscal year, which would be like September.
Okay. Oh, good. Well, that's not bad. That's pretty quick, I think. We're a big city. There's a lot of moving parts to it, as we've talked about. So that's great. Now, the other thing, I guess this is, I'm just asking a question that no one can answer, but my hope, but my question is, do we think the study might expand the current EV charging site plan, meaning 1,500 by whatever the time frame is, seems really small, 39,000 cars. That's, in our big city, that's a pretty small number, and accelerate the EV transition, the electrification of our fleet before 2040? Or are we going to let the study really peg those objectives and those timelines, whereas now we've kind of taken high level estimates?
Yes, that is one of the scope items in that contract, is to look at our charging network.
Yeah. Okay, good. And again, I think the whole fleet, my guess is that once we get through this and technologies keep improving all the time, that 2040 seems easy. But what do I know? We'll find out. The other question I had was related to T5, where we're educating the community, et cetera, on these things. And it's another place where, in addition to education, because I think people have a good handle on the benefits of reducing travel demand and working at home and shifting office schedules, as the text says here. But what can we do that's going to incentivize businesses and people? And Alan used the word, and it's sometimes that's what it takes to get people really not just knowing it, but doing it. Or maybe that's what we have to figure out.
Well, one of the things is we're finding, and our home buyers are looking for a fourth bedroom for an office. And so we actually were moving towards smaller homes, but due to COVID, we've moved to, at least one room bigger, so that someone can have an office in their home. The other thing is that we're also doing electric charging stations in the home. So not only are you going to see, and sure. I think incentivizing that is the way to do it, not necessarily mandating it. I think you're going to get a lot of buy-in right now. A lot of people are buying in and self-funding electric car purchases. And General Motors just announced the fact they're going to have a new car 30 fleet in the coming 10 years, actually sooner. So there's going to be buy-in already, and the demand will be there for it. I don't think even a mandate's going to be necessary. It's just going to be a desire, and people are going to want to fund it and do it. Yeah. But anyway, that's my thoughts about the buses, because I think we really need to think through how the type of electricity we're buying and what we're going to actually, I don't want to create a net carbon increase.
Yeah, well, the other thing, Alan, for you to know there is that the overwhelming majority of all new power plants being built in America are wind, solar, and storage. So it's all heading the right way. Don't worry. Mm-hmm. But to the other point I would add, and this comes back to Sue and company, is for incentives and travel demand management, as we call it here, there's the individual aspects that Alan's talking about, but there's also working with business communities and businesses and chambers of commerce to educate, where we get more leverage and impact through larger groups and larger numbers of people and that kind of education and incentives. So that's what I'm thinking about, and things that maybe we can work on there that not only take people from understanding, but again, to taking the action. A lot of people talk, not as many people do, walk the walk.
Well, we're seeing a lot of people right now doing long commutes, and I just questioned with regard to transportation, the fact that a lot of the pollutants that are being shed and the carbon plume up and down 75, the tollway, and 35 and 30 are not necessarily residents of Dallas. A lot of the carbon we're taking in as a city are from suburban commuters. And so that number, I don't know if we've quantified that number, but my goal would be to make the city much more attractive so that people aren't living in their cars. And so density, the availability of readily, really incentivizing programs to make the city attractive. And that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. I'm good on transportation.
I'm sorry, who?
No, thank you. I'm good on transportation. I've got something. I'll wait till we get through the clean air section that I think is coming up.
Yeah,
okay.
I did have a final comment, and I'm sorry I'm intervening so much, but transportation and mobility is my passion. I had the opportunity to be in Metro de Caracas as a board member when we were moving 1.2 million people a day in our subway system, which was for 6 million people. I understand the carrot and the stick. And we're looking at the carrots, yes, incentives. I do think there's got to be some sticks. I really like the approach of making parking downtown very expensive. This is something that a lot of American cities have done. I mean, in New York City, anybody who lives downtown can't afford to pay for the parking. So I think that's very good. I know here in Texas, where we have so much space and we have such big trucks, it might be really hard. I believe that the funding of public transportation is not only favors the people that don't have cars or decide not to have cars, but it benefits all of society. And all of society should pay for it. Even the people that are driving, their car by themselves in the fast lane that was constructed for them because they can pay the toll. So in France, 30 years ago, maybe 40, I don't even remember anymore, I saw the Versement de Transport, which was a tax or a stick that was the big employers would benefit if their people arrived fresh and clean and on time on sustainable and affordable transportation. So there was a Versement de Transport that works everywhere. And I went to a place called Laon, which is next to Lyon. And it was a city that was up on this mountain because to defend itself. And they invented the Palma 2000 in year 2000. And it was basically a box with a cable that went back and forth to get everyone up and down. But this mayor, who had 2,000 people, had created the technology and had solved his problem with a box attached. It was pretty much a gondola, but on the ground. And he was marketing it to Caracas in our slums. So we as a city can be bold enough to think in these other side of the coin, which is not only the incentive, but the penalization of the people who are contaminating and giving asthma to all our children, which are the people that are driving their cars. Saying this, I live in Capel and I work in Lancaster. I wanted to go in public transportation. It would take me 2.5 hours each way. I cannot do so many crochet projects and read. So I can't spend 5 hours going to work, even if I want to. So I go into what Michael and Alan are saying. A lot of the pollution that the city of Dallas citizens are breathing has to do with us commuting these long distances. So I would like to see, as a task force member, bolder measures on the stick side of things. And I know that's not popular, and most probably I'm a political scientist. And when we tell our politicians that we want to increase taxes or do some kind of fees, they're probably going to push back. But I do want to say that sustainable and affordable transportation is everyone benefits from it, and not just, you know, the low income people that are using the buses and the trains.
Well, right now in Dallas, we have a problem in the southern sector is if for some neighborhoods, it takes 4 hours to go to the grocery store and back because there's no direct bus lines. So DART has to address the routes in the southern sector so people can get to grocery stores. Those are, it's not serving the people that really need this, that need it.
Oh,
and
no,
so
Paul Quinn students, Alan, Paul Quinn students did that. They measured how long it took from Paul Quinn to get groceries, and it took them two hours each way to get some food. So that, then again, that's another layer of information we need to do. So it's transportation that's affordable and sustainable with where is the produce and the food and where is the education, and that's what's being sustainable. Just putting all those layers and making sure it works.
Right.
Okay, task force members, I think we need to move to goal 8, air quality, and hopefully we target about 2:30 for that discussion because we need to have time to get to the environmental commission portion of our meeting. So let's go to goal 8, air quality.
Okay, I'll jump right in to air quality, which is our goal 8. And this is just a persistent problem for North Texas, one that has a direct and immediate effect on human health. Next slide, Katie. So goal 8 is all Dallas communities breathe clean air. And the objective related to this goal is to take a comprehensive approach at addressing air quality at a neighborhood level. And why does this matter here in North Texas? Well, 10 counties in North Texas, including Dallas, have consistently been in violation of the federal air quality standard for ground level ozone. And what this means practically is that people in sensitive groups like children and elderly and people with diminished lung capacity, they experience negative health effects more days. There are more unsafe days for them in North Texas. And we've recently received some information that we might be moving to a more severe non-attainment status based on our monitor readings for 2020. And Dallas has been ranked on lists by the American Lung Association as one of the most ozone polluted cities, which means that people with those diminished lung capacities have a hard time more days than not. And there's also some statistics on this slide that talk about the percentages of asthma in our area. Next slide, Katie. So some targets for Dallas. The design value is currently 76 parts per million here in Dallas. And we set some targets in the CCAP plan for ground level ozone and for the other criteria pollutants. So for ground level ozone, the target is to meet the national ambient air quality standards by 2030. And that's the one that we're currently in violation of, and to maintain that attainment status through 2050. And for the remaining criteria pollutants, to meet the NAAQS attainment standards through 2030. Next slide, please. So this slide represents what it looks like through our equity lens when we're looking at air quality. What you're seeing here is there's a shaded layer that demonstrates the low income communities by census tract. And then you'll see in the circles, those it's overlaid with the number of asthma cases. So you'll see a direct correlation between low income communities and the asthma cases. So this demonstrates that where the most affected areas are and where the people are experiencing the negative health effects. Next slide. Oh, I'll turn it over to Katie and we'll walk through really fast what we're planning to implement this year in this sector.
All right, thanks, Far. Like Far said, I'm going to breeze through this, pun intended. So we've got OEQS working with transportation, planning, and sustainable development on air quality initiatives this year. We have all 4 of our air quality sector actions are being kicked off in our work plan this year. We have installed an air monitoring station, an additional air monitoring station at Dallas Pilgrim Drive. This station is online, but we're waiting for final TCEQ approval to make it fully functional with the information available. Additionally, we've kicked off our Breathe Easy Dallas program with the Nature Conservancy, where we've got neighborhood level monitors in school zones. So we are working on that program as well. It kicked off just a couple weeks ago, and I'm sure Sue can answer any questions, as she has so many other questions about the Breathe Easy Dallas program. We're really excited about that. Additionally, we've been part of the Air North Texas campaign for quite some time. We will continue to participate in that regional program and expand on it as we are able, tailoring our communication to suit needs of different communities. So it's been a fairly consistent messaging so far, but we plan to tailor our communication a little bit more specifically as needed when we are able and when the situation calls for it. Furthermore, AQ4, we want to ensure that new industries are an appropriate distance away from neighborhoods. Our partners in planning and urban design are working on some mapping that will indicate known environmentally impacted parcels. This is part of their update to their land use plan, and it's going to show us some environmental justice areas as well as environmentally impacted areas. So it's called in the new plan racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty, and lining that up with these residential and industrial properties to give us a good picture of what we're looking at in terms of environmental justice and environmentally impacted parcels. So that's my very quick part. I think we have a few minutes for questions on the air quality section.
Yeah, I think you're our first one. Rita?
Yeah, I just want to bring up to everyone, I know Far brought up the 8-hour standard, but actually our 4-county area of Tarrant, Collin, Denton, and Dallas County have been out of attainment since 1991, 1992, when we were on the 1-hour standard. And at that time, we were rated for moderate. So the standards have changed over the years where the previous standard gets revoked. But I just want people to have a picture of the fact that we've been out of compliance since the earliest of the 90s.
30 years. Yikes.
And the other thing I want to bring up is this. I'd like to see us have a more robust air campaign in the region. I realize we partner with the North Texas group, but I feel like we could have a more robust campaign involving or partnering with other groups. So I'd like to see that happen. That's all I've got.
Thanks, Rita. Michael Martin?
Hi, thank you. So understanding that it'll take us a while to perhaps work our way to be in compliance, in the meantime, and Katie, I'm not sure if I heard anything that would signal this, but what are we going to do to also tighten the emission requirements of industry and business? So not only their location, but the amount and really monitoring and measuring it, because you know, the history in our city and our state and our whole country, for that matter, is if you can get away with it, you admit what you can. So even if they're not, if we're successful in keeping them away from the communities, neighborhoods, it's still going to pollute our air collectively because it all blows around. So what are we going to do about that, or what's the thinking there? And then this is where sticks that Maria mentioned on an earlier topic. We now have to, if people are just going to blatantly do stuff that they know they shouldn't and it harms their neighbors, severe fines and or criminal indictments seem to me to be appropriate. It's criminal to pollute and harm the health of your neighbor, but there is no teeth in this, it seems, in this world. And I think that's our challenge here. And we should propose that is something we do to ensure that we get the results we need in blending business with human beings living in their communities.
So I do know that in terms of your first question and air emissions from industries, we do air permitting, and we do contract for TCEQ to do that process. And I'm going to let Sue jump in and explain that a little bit more. I know that we follow the TCEQ regulations in terms of that. So Sue, if you want to expand on that to answer Michael's question, I don't think he likes that answer.
Sure. And it gets into a legal term called primacy. And the state regs have primacy on local municipal regs. We're certainly supportive of measures that we collectively can do through our state legislature and other places as appropriate to address some of these things. Don't necessarily disagree. The other thing is, if you look at a pinwheel of where those emissions are coming from, while we do have some industrial folks in Dallas, if I remember right, and Kevin may want to correct me, but I think our industrial emissions are about 9% of the total, whereas our emissions from transportation sources are at 44%.
Sure.
And so while we definitely need to be looking at those emissions from our industrial sector, in the great scheme of things, the transportation is a bigger contributor.
Yes, absolutely. It just seems that when those smaller scale industrial emissions or business emissions, they seem to have such high impact in a small area, and it's, they're people too, and they matter as much as the rest of us. So that's the only reason I bring that up. So thank you for the comments. I'm shaking my head on TCEQ because it seems to me TCEQ doesn't know how to measure much of anything well, or to take action to make reparations when violations occur. Flaring in West Texas is out of control. They have no idea. So I worry about how well they're going to monitor my air and y'all's air on this call with me today here in Dallas, Fort Worth area. I just hope they'll do better at it. I don't think their track record's very good. I understand primacy.
Rita, did you have another comment? Because your hand's still up. Oh my goodness.
I didn't know my hand was up, but just for those in the room that don't know the history, Sandy was even on this committee with me. There used to be a North Central Texas Clean Air Steering Committee at COG, which comprised of mayors, officials, city council people, and some of us as NGOs. And our goal was to develop a state implementation plan to clean up the air. I think somebody needs to go on mute. But anyway, TCEQ in the end, even though the committee would put forth measures, would always hijack the planning process and would develop a plan that was barely passable. And yet they knew industry, in fact, would and did sue about some of the measures we had, to the point where that committee probably hasn't met in at least a decade. It's unfortunate, but that's how our state agency's been working in the last number of years. So.
Thank you, Rita. I was wondering if our air quality goals is listed in the CCAP. Are they more aggressive than what COG is having in their plan? Or do they match them?
We're a little bit more aggressive in some areas. We did meet with them on the goals for COG. The modeling that we did shows that even the goals that we have aren't going to get us where we need to go. I am anticipating with the change in compliance status that our regional transportation planning efforts may ratchet things up at that level.
Well, I hope so, because for years and years, we have not been nearly aggressive enough in this district toward meeting, I should say in this region, toward meeting the air quality goals, even the ones that we have that are fairly modest. I mean, our efforts, I don't think, are nearly assertive enough, but that's my opinion. So if we have no other comments on that, I think if we would, could we move to our next agenda item, which is the Environmental Commission formation? Because we have about 30 more minutes left to try and come to some conclusions on that. So has everyone on the task force had an opportunity to look at the PDF that we sent that had some questions for thought and discussion? I hope you all have had a chance to look that over, because we're going to use that as a guide today to try and move forward on this. I know if everybody's remembering back to our discussion last month in December, it looked like we had come to a pretty quick conclusion that we wanted mainly experts on the commission who would focus on implementation of the CCAP. And you'd say, well, I think we're there. I think we know what we want to do. But since then, we've had a few more items of additional information that have come forward that made that quick conclusion maybe a little more problematic. And one of them being, and I hope we have Tammy Palomino and Billy Ray Johnson on our call or on our meeting today, because one of the things that I think we didn't have as a piece of information in December is that people who are on a city board or commission need to reside in the city of Dallas for 6 months before the time they're appointed, for at least 6 months. Many of the experts that I think many of us would hope would be on this commission do not live in the city of Dallas. And so if we said that we wanted experts on the commission, we would have to search for people that live in the city of Dallas who may or may not be the right folks for these positions, but it would definitely preclude anybody who doesn't live in the city of Dallas from serving on this commission, unless they were a non-voting member. And I don't know, Tammy, are you on as a resource here? Sue, do we know if Tammy and
Ms. Grayson, I don't see either one of them. Do you want me to reach out to them and see if they can join us?
Would you please? Because did they get notice of the meeting? Because I thought that.
So, but I don't see them on the thing. So I'll reach out to them.
Okay, and meanwhile, I'll move forward. But so what we said in having experts, if not at every seat on the commission, most of the seats, would probably be difficult for council members to fulfill those appointments if they had to live in the city of Dallas. And so we have some, hybrid models that we could possibly institute, or potentially a model where we fill the 15 seats on the commission with environmentally experienced people who are citizens, and then have a non-voting advisory group of experts in each sector of the CCAP. Now, that's one possible way we could recommend that the commission be formed. So as we move forward, I was just wondering if everybody had a chance to maybe think about this a little bit, given the new information. And some of the other information I wanted to share with you was that some council members have told me that they would like, of course, to have the commission focus on the CCAP, but also they would like the commission to be aware of and or work on environmentally related issues within their council districts. And I'm thinking that is, for instance, why Councilmember Blackman in District 9 wanted you all to be aware of the Old Fish Hatchery issue, because she felt like that was something that was within the purview of our task force and any future environmental commission. And then Councilmember Tanel Atkins in District 8, who is in far South Dallas, has lots of environmental issues in his district. He has got the Shingle Mountain site. He has got a Superfund site called Lane Plating. He's got the landfill with all the attendant truck traffic that goes back and forth with residential neighborhoods by the landfill, having to deal with all that truck traffic. And so he's got a number of issues that he wants our task force and an environmental commission of the future to be aware of. So with these new kind of pieces of information, I felt like it was important for us to have another discussion, because I wasn't sure that the model we came up with last time would be one that the council members would feel was the best model, given their concerns. So does anyone have any thoughts about maybe where we should go from here in terms of maybe the membership commission? Ehrman?
Hey, Sandy, thanks so much. Yeah, I had not thought about the limitation on people living in the city of Dallas before, but one thing I want to say regarding membership that I think is important, I think it's really important that we have some seats on the board, at least, for people who live in some of our most polluted communities. We were looking at a lot of maps around air quality, asthma, transportation, and especially for communities that face the brunt of a lot of these challenges. I think for them to have a seat at the table and an ability to vote is an important consideration from an equity standpoint. Just a quick reaction. I like the idea of maybe having residents, and then if we want additional experts, having them as non-voting members. I think that would make sense and help us have the expertise we need. And I tend to agree with council members Atkins and Blackman that we want to be able to address or hear about issues happening in districts and have a broader scope. And I think about that not just in terms of issues that might arise, but also I think this is going to become climate, environment, a more and more important issue as we move on into the future. I imagine this commission existing in some form for the next 30, 50 years. And there's going to be new technology. We're going to be focusing more and more on adaptation and resilience as well. And so I think just leaving the scope of the committee broad for that purpose is really valuable. And then this isn't necessarily related to your questions, but I think just in our conversation today, there are so many different groups that the city works with that affect these issues, and having some ability to partner with them in a cohesive, intentional way is really important. And so, yeah, the idea of liaisons, possibly having joint meetings, having working sessions, I don't know exactly what it is, but something like that I think is important. So, and then, yeah, I know this is a lot. Last point, public input, I think we definitely want to provide for it. I think one thing that we've learned in COVID is we can provide input virtually on the telephone or over a WebEx, and I'd love to see us institutionalize that to make it easier for people to participate in some way. So those are my high-level thoughts. I'm not sure how we go from that to like a more specific recommendation. I'm happy to help with that, but yeah, just wanted to share that as a starting point.
I appreciate that, Armin. Thank you. I do like the idea of liaisons acting, because that to me strengthens partnerships. If different boards and commissions are working on issues, or staff members from other departments, it would help, I think, the environmental commission members to have a say-so in that, which is, I believe, what the city council members want. So in terms of public input, I think we're almost going to have to see if we can make an effort in our recommendations to institutionalize that, because every board and commission determines their own procedures, and they can decide whether they want to accept public input or not. And so we, I think as a group, are thinking that's a very important component, and we would want that to be available to the public. And then another point of that is, and you mentioned it, just the public having the ability to have a seat at the table versus just spending 3 minutes giving a public comment versus having a seat at the table by being a member of the board. But that's up to the council members to decide who they want to appoint. Now, we could, in determining the positions for the board, if we said 15 members of the general public, we could put qualifications around those positions. And we could say, for instance, that we want members of the general public who have some environmental background versus somebody sitting on the commission who's never done anything related to the environment or public health or anything. That we would think would be something that they should have some awareness of before they're seated. So we can do that. We can make that part of our recommendations. The council members will either accept it or they won't. But I think that they would give it very serious consideration if we recommended it.
Yeah,
So-
Sandy, thanks so much for sharing that. I agree with everything you said. I do think we don't just want members of the general public, but folks who have that background or folks who have that experience from living in their own neighborhood of facing some of these challenges. And I also should have mentioned, I went back to my neighborhood group at West Dallas One and asked them, just, we're thinking about this commission, what would you like to see? And the feedback I got from our neighborhood was that they'd like to see a mix of people who are, in touch with their neighborhoods, who understand the issues, and a mix of experts on the commission. So just wanted to share that as well.
Okay. And the only way we may be able to get experts is through having them be a non-voting advisory body, because if they have to be residents, that really limits the expertise that we can get on the commission.
Yeah,
So, thank you.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Tracy was up next.
My question is on that last point. What can you give us some specific feedback on which experts we think we cannot get from within the city?
Well, I don't know that. Maybe we could fill every seat with the right person who has the right expertise. My general thinking, which y'all are free to disagree with or agree with, would be that we would hope to have an expert from each of the 8 areas of the CCAP. I think that would be important to have somebody there representing each of the 8 areas. Or what we could wind up with is, for instance, maybe 5 transportation experts and 3 representing other parts of the CCAP, which I think would not be as useful. So that's kind of what my thinking is. Now, I'm not saying at all that we couldn't fill all of those slots from within the city of Dallas, but if we couldn't, we would actually have to, because if they were voting members, they would have to live in the city of Dallas. And that is a requirement that cannot be waived by council.
I think we have plenty of experts in Dallas.
Well, if you all feel comfortable that we have enough expertise within the city, then we don't have to worry about that as a limiting factor. But I had just heard some input from various people that said they were concerned that we may not have the right expertise within the city and therefore would want to have them be an advisory to the commission.
It's Rita. I do think we shouldn't limit the experts only to Dallas, and this is why. You look at the role COG plays in transportation projects, and there's some experts from out there. I can't tell you for sure that they live in Dallas or not, but I would certainly hate to exclude experts that we could get a great amount of information on by just putting that Dallas designation on it. So,
Well, but as a if I may comment, Sandy, if as a group, the EC can choose to engage and partner and seek advice and input from any organization or individual it wants. This is about voting and who's running this and who has a stake in it. And if this is for Dallas, I think you got to be a Dallasite. It just.
So, Michael, what my intention was on that is that they be a non-voting member, the technical advisory group, that if we needed one, we could have it,
Sure.
not be a voting part. I forgot to mention that thing.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess it
So
all, if we want to go 15 or 23. That was one of the things in your document, Sandy, was how big we want this thing to be.
Right, and part of that is kind of what do you want the membership to be? We can go bigger, we can't go smaller. So what do you want the membership to be? If most of you decide that you still want to have the membership be experts, at least mostly experts, and that we have enough talent in the city of Dallas, then that's what we can recommend. But next month, we're going to start taking some votes on this. And so we're going to, ask each of you to please be thinking about this to the point where you're going to vote for something one way or the other.
Yeah.
So, okay, so who is next? I think it might be Alan Hoffman, then Maria.
Go ahead, Alan.
Hi, I wanted to support what Rita was saying and Aramon. I think that's what you were saying. I think we need to have some experts because we don't know what we don't know. We're talking about 30 to 50 years out. There's going to be some emergency technologies with regard to carbon capture. There's going to be emerging technologies with regard to fuel cell. We need to have this open enough so that we don't lock ourselves into a box, because there may not be an expert in Dallas on carbon capture. There may not be an expert on fuel cells in Dallas right now. And there's just an emerging, we're really looking at solving this problem with a technological shift. And I think we need to be open to input from everyone.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Maria?
Yes, I'm going to put on my cap as a social scientist and well, I teach government. So I think the more the merrier, but the bigger the group, the harder it is to make decisions as well. So I would propose a technical secretariat. I can't pronounce it today. Today's Friday. I'm thinking in Spanish. Secretaría Técnica, technical secretariat, with the experts would be there according to their content experts. And I would make it broad because, for example, I saw the sustainable plan for the city of Atlanta. Wow, that was an incredible plan. So, I mean, we might even have some expertise that's not that local. Maybe it's regional, maybe it's national, I don't know. So I would see the organization would be a technical secretariat that's attached to the side, which is like an advisory. And then we would have the citizens not only representing the 8 areas. I mean, the 8 areas of the CCAP is important, but the locations, but I would also say the sectors, because you're going to have business people there to give their input, because what some citizens might be, it's that mentality, not in my backyard, so you're going to have businesses, you're going to have nonprofits, you're going to have normal citizens, educational partners, CISD. So it's in order for it to be because we're trying to be comprehensive here. I think the bigger, the better for that. But I would do a profile for each of these people that are sitting here. You're going to have experts that are going to be able to vote, because I'm sure the city of Dallas has people that know about transportation and air quality, but you might have an expert that's from another place. So I would just say, let's not put any limits. I think we should ask for the ideal, and then the politicians will think of it through the politician role and will say, yes, this goes or this doesn't go. I think we should be thinking of the ideal of input we need, not only to push this forward, but but also to vet it and to tweak it. I mean, plans on paper look beautiful, but the hard thing is when you start implementing, you want to have a whole bunch of allies that can help you, move it forward and tweak it according to what is needed.
Well, I think the commission could always ask people to come in, even above, say if there were 15 members and 8 advisory members, the commission can always have the freedom to ask other expertise to come in and advise them. They wouldn't have a vote, but they would be able to give information to the commission that the commission would need when they're considering particular issues. So we can always, they can always have the freedom to do that. And then we can make a recommendation to the council that there be an advisory commission composed of X number of people who have this kind of expertise. But my thinking is probably that the council will probably ask our staff to help them choose those folks in large measure. They may ask the staff to make recommendations as to the experts for each CCAP area, because I'm not sure the council members themselves would know who those experts are. And that's one of the concerns that they raised to me, is that they don't necessarily know people who have that expertise in each one of those CCAP sectors. So the staff could give them advice as to who might be the right people to appoint to those positions. But I'm concerned that if we didn't make a recommendation for a certain number or a certain type of expertise, that it might not happen. So thank you. Michael, did you still have your hand up?
No, thank you,
No?
Sandy. I just wrote a note. I think this is all great input. I wrote a note that kind of summarized where I'm at on this right now. So thank you. I'm good.
Okay, let's since we've got some input on the membership, let's move on to, the size is a related issue. If we decide that we want to have 15 plus 8, and the 8 be advisory, we can make that recommendation. If we wanted to advise that we have a 23-member commission, then they would all have to be people who live in Dallas, because they would be voting members. So we would, the recommendation that we make will either depend on how many voting and non-voting members we want. So if you all would be thinking a little bit about that, which is what's a good size for the commission and how many should be voting members? Should there be non-voting members, or should we limit it to 15 or maybe 20? It doesn't have to be 15, but it has to be at least 15. So if you would all be thinking about that, and I think that goes along with who you want to see sitting on a commission. And then the subject matter. It seemed that most of you had wanted it to focus on CCAP implementation. And that's logical and that makes sense, except that council members are saying, yes, but we would like to have you all have a little bit broader mandate on that commission. We would like you to look at district issues. And I saw, Michael, that you made a note that said maybe we can't consider every district issue, but that would be something I think that the commission themselves would make a determination as to what do they have the time, the resources, and the desire to address which district issues. But I think that council members are kind of telling me they don't want us to preclude the possibility of having the commission have the ability to consider district issues by saying they will only look at CCAP implementation. So many of these district issues, though, are, they fall under one of the sectors of the CCAP, and an argument could be made that, well, this falls under section 6 or 8 or whatever of the CCAP, and so therefore you should consider it. So please be thinking about whether you want to see it again, limited to CCAP implementation, or open it up for having the possibility of considering other issues. If they do consider other issues, they may want to meet or need to meet more than once a month. And should we recommend once a month or twice a month, given the, the scope of what this commission is going to be asked to consider? So that's another issue that we have to do. And so I think in a way, the frequency of the meetings will fall under our decision about the subject matter. So, Jeanette, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I do have a question because I think the scope of work that this committee is supposed to do will depend upon how many people we need. And my question is, are we able to have advisors in subcommittees? So can we set up subcommittees? I know the chair would have to set up the subcommittees, but if we set up subcommittees, could we fill those subcommittees with folks that can address these, in particular, these extra issues of Shingle Mountain or fish hatchery or whatever?
Well, generally, the commission chair is the one who decides whether there can be subcommittees. I'm sure with the agreement of the commission, but it's generally the commission chair that sets up subcommittees and the participants in the subcommittees, so that I think it would be up to them to decide, the chair and the commission, who sits on those subcommittees. I guess we could make a recommendation that they have subcommittees, but again, that's really not within our purview. That's more within the purview of the chair and the commission members.
The only reason I ask is all of these issues are going to get bigger, not smaller. And these commissions are volunteer time. And so, I would rather see kind of more of a move towards a qualitative commission rather than a quantitative take on everything without having the ability to come out with quality outcomes. So that's why I would try to think about about the subcommittees. And also, my other question was, what about liaisons between the different city departments to this committee? How do we address that?
Well, I think we can. I think they can ask for any city staff members they want to come to their commission meetings. And so if they have an issue that requires some city staff from planning or public works or transportation, they can ask that those city staff members be there to assist them in deliberating that particular issue. But I guess I also like the idea, though, of commission members themselves being liaisons with different city departments and actually the boards that are part of the city department, like the City Plan Commission. And the City Plan Commission has subcommittees, one of them being transportation, one of them being zoning. So they can determine for themselves if they want to have these, but we could make a recommendation that we think liaisons are a good idea. Does that help, Jeanette? I can't hear you.
Sorry, it did help me. I just think, this is going to get big. It's going to snowball is what it's going to do, because these are big issues that integrate into every department. So I just want to make sure that we've got the baseline and plus the advocacy to move this stuff forward. So that was my questions. Thanks, Sandy.
Okay, thank you. And I think we have Ehrman and Rita.
I think I just left my hand up accidentally, so I'm
okay
good for now.
All right. Rita, did you have anything you wanted to say?
Well, I was just going to say, kind of following up on Jeanette is, if we're gonna have to have a way, for instance, if we need the park and rec board member to listen to what's going on, or if there are steering committees or subcommittees that need to participate, so we can make things move, we'll obviously have to accommodate that somehow.
Okay, thank you, Rita. I think what we're going to do, since we're running out of time, is to let you all know that next month we're going to try and really boil this down to get answers on each one of these 4 sections: membership, size, subject matter, and meeting frequency. And we're talking about potentially sending out these questions to you ahead of time and getting you to send them back with your thoughts, so that would help streamline what we're going to do next month. If anybody else has any quick comments, I'd like to hear it because we're going to try and distill this down next month so that we can get our set of recommendations to the council in March.
Hey,
So,
this is Armin. Can we volunteer to be part of the distillation process?
actually, I think you're all going to be part of this. What did you have in mind, Araman? What did you have in mind?
There's some work that is going to be done between this meeting and next meeting where people are synthesizing feedback and putting together maybe a condensed version of everyone's feedback. And I was just wondering if we can be involved in that process yeah, maybe I'll just leave it at that.
If you want to, I see no problem with that. We would welcome anybody who wants to help us get this down to a form that we can have a set of recommendations ready for them in March. So we gladly take your help. Anybody else too that would like to help us distill this down into a final product, we're more than happy to help you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I certainly agree with the send us the questionnaire, Sandy, so we can give you the feedback with plenty of time for that distillation process so we can figure this out next meeting. That's a great idea, of course.
Okay, great. And it'll probably look much like it did this time. And then if you all would just say, okay, as far as membership goes, here's my recommendation. As far as subject matter goes, here's my recommendation. And if you could put that all together, I think that would really help us move forward more quickly. Okay? And we'll do that. We'll get that to you all. Okay? Then thank you. I think that we are done. We're going to have our next meeting on February 12th. And it's supposed to be buildings and energy, but it's also going to have to be a lot about finalizing our commission recommendations. So I need a motion for adjournment, please.
So moved.
Is there a second? Michael seconded it. Who moved adjournment?
Alan.
Alan, thank you so much. And this meeting is adjourned at 3:03. Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
everyone.
Have a great week.
Thank you.